Tonight on Bridge City News, a father of one of the Humboldt Broncos players who was killed speaks out after reading his impact statement in court today. One of Canada's worst serial killers pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. We talk with a criminal defense lawyer about how much time Bruce McCarthy may receive behind bars. And Lethbridge College received a unique collection from the federal government today. We have the details. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. More families impacted by the Humboldt Broncos bus tragedy spoke in court today as the sentencing hearing for the truck driver responsible for the crash continues. Jaspreet Singh Sidhu has pleaded guilty to 29 charges of dangerous driving in the crash last April, which killed 16 and injured 13 others. Yesterday, the court heard that the truck was covering all lanes of the Saskatchewan intersection north of Tisdale when the junior hockey team's bus struck it. The truck also ran the stop sign. The father of 18-year-old Evan Thomas, who died in the crash, says sharing his statement was a powerful moment.
It was intense. It was in the lead up to it, your heart skips a few beats and mouth goes dry, and then you just find your place. I felt Evan right behind me, right over my shoulder, and we had a message we wanted to send to him, and we did. It was a powerful moment in our family's journey through this, for sure. And like we've used the analogy a couple times about closing chapters, and that closes one chapter.
About half of the 75 impact statements are still to be submitted. Ari Goldkind is a criminal defense lawyer in Toronto, and he joins me now via Skype. Ari, explain the relevance of the victim impact statements. Are they more about closure for the families?
Anybody who thinks the victim impact statements make a big impression on a judge is actually incorrect. They're really for closure, catharsis, letting people who normally don't talk in a courtroom. I talk every day in a courtroom. These are families that don't want to be in a courtroom. They don't want to be there, but it allows the system to have some respect for what they've been put through as the result of a crime. And remember, we're talking a crime here, not a civil action, not a lawsuit. So it's really a way of having people who love, in this case, the deceased or injured people, come forward, have their voices heard, but it really should not sway a judge all that much, which some people think it should, but it actually doesn't.
What kind of time would the driver of the semi, Jaspreet Singh Sidhu, receive behind bars? I mean, he pleaded guilty to all 29 charges.
And I can tell you, as much as I think judges often have a very easy job, I don't envy this sentencing judge because there's so many unbelievably interesting factors here. First of all, he could get up to, in my view, 14 years under the section of the criminal code he's charged with. Now, some people might say, because there's 16 different people who were killed, it should be 16 times 14. That's not how it works in Canada because it's one car accident. It's not like he went out and shot and made a decision to shoot 16 people. So for the point of my answer, let's use 16 as the max. But you look at what are called the mitigating factors, the factors that bring the sentence down. He pled guilty when he did not need to. That's a massively important detail to lowering the sentence. He didn't have a trial. He didn't make anybody testify. He didn't even make the Crown prove or test the case. So, as most viewers will know, we put people in jail essentially to separate them from society. The argument that Mr. Sidhu needs to be separated from the rest of us, I think, is a little bit bloodthirsty. So I think this judge will have a real struggle with what to do with Mr. Sidhu, despite the maximums, because it's not like Mr. Sidhu woke up that morning the way Paul Bernardo or Dylan Millard or Bruce McArthur did, saying, I'm going to go out and wreak havoc and kill somebody.
Some other big news today in that Bruce McArthur has confessed to being one of Canada's worst serial killers, murdering 8 men he picked up in Toronto's Gay Village. He pleaded guilty to 8 charges of first-degree murder. Why didn't he fight it?
This is the really, really interesting part of this case because most people who don't work in the system think that pleas or guilty pleas in first-degree murder cases are probably common. What's unusual about it? You've got evidence. We've got your DNA. The guy's going to plead guilty. Wrong. The way it works in our system is that it's the one charge in our criminal code. And remember, there are hundreds of charges in the criminal code. It's the one charge where there's no incentive for an accused person to plead guilty. There's no deal to be had. There's no quid pro quo. So while there was a mountain of evidence, DNA, his computer was closed, he kept mementos of the men he killed, all sorts of macabre, sort of HBO, Netflixy kind of stuff, he told his lawyers he's going to plead. Not the other way around. From a lawyer's point of view, you want to go to trial. You want to test the evidence. There's nothing to lose. But to Bruce McArthur's credit, and I use this term loosely so nobody misunderstands it, he stepped up to the plate. He saved about a 4-month trial, millions of dollars of court time, and more than that, the families of all 8 of these men who were thought to be forgotten and disappeared, they don't have to sit through a trial. And when you go to trial, you never really know what will happen. Here, he is going to die in jail where most Canadians would agree he belongs.
Criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind, thanks so much for your time today.
Great to be with you.
The Blood Tribe Police need our help finding this man, Louis Red Crow. His family reported him missing yesterday. 47-year-old Red Crow is described as 5 feet 6 inches tall, 160 pounds, with brown eyes and hair. He has tattoos on his chest, both arms, and just below his left eye. He has ties to both Lethbridge and Calgary. If you've seen Red Crow, please call the Blood Tribe Police right away at 403-737-3800. Lethbridge College has received a gift of rare soil from the federal government. Today, the college unveiled a collection of 110 soil monoliths from Western Canada. The collection was originally created in the 1950s and 60s by soil surveyors and contains 8 of the 10 orders of soil identified in the Canadian System of Soil Classification. It has a value of over $240,000. However, the college feels this collection is invaluable as a teaching tool.
We know that it's worth a lot, but it really is priceless in terms of you can't recreate those soil monoliths now, and the time that was taken to do them back then, to have them housed here at the college, is really quite special.
So while the details of their origin story are a bit murky, the real tales that it tells are in the actual soil monoliths. So we estimate it took at least 150 days of labor to carefully excavate, transport, and preserve the soil monoliths.
The collection is currently on display on the 3rd floor of the college's Cousins building. Farm Credit Canada is hosting Ignite, a summit for those under the age of 40. The event is one of 11 in a series of events across Canada and is designed to engage the next generation of farmers and those already working in the industry. The event is planned for Wednesday, February 6th from 10 till 3:30 p.m. and it'll be held at the Sandman Signature Lethbridge Hotel on Scenic Drive. McGrath Elementary and High School is celebrating the grand opening of the newly modernized school. Over the last 5 years, the school has seen a complete modernization, including the building of a brand new gymnasium and open area. There's also a new community library and a 10,000 square foot innovation center, which houses a new theater, technology, and cosmetology lab. The modernization will give the students and community the opportunity to enjoy the building.
Everyone, as they come into this area, has been really excited. We've had a number of different athletic events already taking place here as the construction is just winding down. People are always amazed when they come in here. It used to be with an athletic event, everyone would go into the gym, sit on the bleachers and watch. Now for a game or a tournament, we'll have 100 people out here in this gathering area sitting on chairs, watching through the glass wall, enjoying the events that take place.
The $30 million project was mostly funded by the provincial government and received help as well from the town of McGrath. A 13-year-old girl who was injured when a school bus rolled east of Highway 2 yesterday was airlifted to a Calgary hospital. Police in High Rivers say the bus had 8 students on board when the accident occurred. The Foothill School Division said in a message that 2 students and the driver were injured. Officials say 1 student was treated and released. The school bus driver was also taken to hospital. The remaining students were unharmed. RCMP say the crash is currently under investigation. The Kootenay Ice of the Western Hockey League are on the move. The team announced today that they'll be relocating the franchise to Winnipeg after the season. The Ice are currently dead last in the Central Division with a 10-32-7-1 record and has the league's worst attendance. The team has been discussing relocation since last October. The transfer is part of a larger plan by the owner and investors to build a large commercial and an entertainment hub, which would be anchored by an arena in the southwest part of Winnipeg. The team will play in a renovated University of Manitoba facility until the new arena is built in 2 years. The Edmonton Public School Board says it plans to install carbon monoxide detectors at all of its schools. The devices are mandatory in new homes, but there are no rules for schools. The board expects to spend up to $100,000 to install the detectors. Edmonton Catholic schools say there are no plans to install detectors in all of their schools, but a spokesperson says the district puts them in automotive classrooms and portables. Lethbridge School District number 51 released a statement today saying they are reviewing and assessing the installation of carbon monoxide detectors in our schools, as our student and staff safety is one of our most important priorities. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland said John McCallum was fired as Canada's ambassador to China because he did not toe the government's line on the arrest of a Chinese Huawei executive.
Ambassador McCallum's comments were inconsistent with the position of the Government of Canada. The first and foremost job of any ambassador of our country is to express accurately our government's position. And that is what made it untenable for Ambassador McCallum to remain in his role. I do want to say, though, I consider John to be a friend. He was, in fact, at my home in early January. He is a remarkable Canadian and has been a remarkable public servant. He had a very distinguished academic career, one of Canada's foremost economists. In Parliament, he has been an outstanding colleague for me, an outstanding Minister of Defence, of Veterans Affairs, and I think John would probably say he is most proud of the work he did as Minister of Immigration. And I'd also like to thank him and his wife Nancy for their service in China. John stayed over the Christmas holidays to be there for Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and I'd like to thank him for his service.
2 bombs went off at a Catholic church in the Philippines recently, killing more than 20 people and injuring many others. Once again, ISIS has claimed responsibility. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says the terror group known as the Islamic State wants to make itself relevant once again.
ISIS is not particularly looking for autonomy or land or this formality or to be recognized by any governments. They are looking to make themselves known in the way of these one-off attacks. And now, since there is this, the global headlines are saying that ISIS is being diminished, they want to make themselves known and say, no, we're not diminished. We're right here, and we're going to show you that we're right here.
Catch my full interview with Lisa talking ISIS and how 13 criminal charges have been laid against Huawei executives. That's coming up after business news. Release International welcomed the decision by Pakistan's Supreme Court to uphold the acquittal of Asia Bibi. Asia had false claims of blasphemy thrown out against her, which did not sit well with many in Pakistan. Release's CEO, Paul Robinson, says it was very good news that Bibi was found innocent in court.
Well, as you say, it's more than good news, isn't it? It's absolutely wonderful news that the Supreme Court in Pakistan has had the courage and the determination to uphold its earlier ruling about Asia Bibi. That is, that the blasphemy charge against her was false and needed to be thrown out. That was challenged in court today. The Supreme Court was asked to review that decision. It reviewed it and very quickly upheld its original position that Asia Bibi is not guilty of blasphemy. We understand that her 2 daughters are in Canada, and that is an obvious place for her to try to get to. It's not just Asia, though. She needs to be able to get out of Pakistan safely. It's also her lawyer who left Holland to fight for her today. And it's not just them. It's every Christian in Pakistan, because there is a real risk of a backlash. When the Supreme Court first passed that decision in October, the streets of Pakistan were filled with protesters who locked down 3 cities, threatened to overthrow the government, threatened to murder the judges, called for Asia Bibi to be hanged. Now that resulted eventually, very slowly, but eventually in a whole series of arrests by the Pakistan government. And Release International is calling on Pakistan today to not just get Asia Bibi safely out of the country, and it's such a shame she can't stay there, but she can't, but to make sure that there is adequate security for all of the Christian minority within Pakistan who have been told to brace for reprisals.
A federal prosecutor in the United States says a drug company founder was driven by greed to bribe doctors to prescribe a highly addictive fentanyl spray. We have more now in this report.
A billionaire pharmaceutical company founder is going to trial in Boston accused of a scheme to bribe doctors to boost prescriptions of his company's powerful synthetic opioid. John Kapoor is the highest-ranking pharma executive to face charges as part of the federal government's efforts to go after those it says are responsible for the opioid crisis.
This is a major prosecution for the Department of Justice. This is really the first corporate criminal prosecution with respect to opioid enforcement.
Kapoor's company, Insys Therapeutics, makes the highly addictive fentanyl spray, Subsys. The FDA has approved Subsys for cancer pain, but prosecutors allege Kapoor's company bribed doctors to prescribe Subsys to patients who didn't have cancer. One of those patients was Sarah Fuller. Fuller's mother claimed she was being treated for fibromyalgia when an Insys sales representative and her doctor convinced her to begin taking Subsys. Fuller died of an overdose a year later.
At 32, she had the rest of her life to live. And it was literally stolen from her by people who don't care.
In court papers, Kapoor's legal defense contends the government has overstepped and is trying to publicly scapegoat Kapoor for the opioid epidemic. Former Insys executives, including the former CEO, have already pled guilty and are cooperating with the prosecution. Deborah Fuller says she plans to attend Kapoor's trial at some point. She knows whatever the result, it won't bring back her daughter, but says she believes the trial itself is important.
I'm glad they're on trial. They are where they belong. And maybe, other pharmaceuticals might sit up and take notice.
Kapoor's trial begins Monday. David Martin, The Associated Press.
Police in Hawaii say 3 people died yesterday when a suspected drunk driver crashed a pickup truck into pedestrians and a cyclist at an intersection. Officials say 5 others were also injured.
We believe speed and alcohol are factors, but that's, again, the investigation is ongoing. No arrests have been made as of yet, but as you folks know, with the suspect being injured, he's taking care of the treatment first, and we're working our investigation at this time.
A recent study out says we in North America are the worst when it comes to wasting food. Lori Nichols, CEO of Second Harvest, says a big reason is because certain groups toss out food once the best before date passes.
We lose a lot of food through forecasting. Best before dates are probably one of the biggest culprits, and that's right across the supply chain. That is not necessarily at the consumer, because we lose tractor trailer loads full of food because of an upcoming best before date, which really has nothing to do with food safety.
Lori will have more on the biggest culprits to food shortages and waste coming up in the second half of our show. A mainly sunny but slightly cooler day today in the Windy City, but a warming trend is on the way. Complete weather details are coming right up. We had a mainly sunny day today. Tonight, a few clouds developing with a low near -7. Tomorrow, mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 6. Mainly sunny on Thursday with a high near 5. Cooling out Friday under a mainly cloudy sky with a high of only -4. Saturday overcast with the mercury dropping to -11. Sunday a good chance of flurries developing with a high of only -17. Monday slightly warmer with more snow and high expected near -13. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is -1 and an average low of -13. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1940 at 14 degrees, and the record low was a cold -39 in 1996. Sunrise was at 8:09, sunset at 5:20. Let's have a look at how tomorrow is shaping up across the country now. Vancouver will be mainly cloudy and 6 degrees, overcast and 8 for Victoria. A mixture of sun and cloud in Calgary and a high near 4. Snow and -5 is expected in Edmonton tomorrow. Regina had an extreme cold warning today. Tomorrow snow and a high of only -20. Snow and -19 is on tap for Saskatoon on Wednesday. The extreme cold warning continued in Winnipeg today. Tomorrow mainly sunny and a high of only -27. A good chance of flurries of -16 is on tap for Toronto. Ottawa should be mainly sunny and -14. Montreal will be mostly cloudy and -11. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will have snow mixed with rain and should get up to 2 degrees tomorrow. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be rainy and 3. Charlottetown, PEI will have periods of snow and 0. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, cloudy and -1 is being forecast for tomorrow. TransCanada is following through with its intention to reduce its interest in the Coastal GasLink pipeline project in BC. The Calgary-based company says it has hired RBC to help it sell up to 75% in the 670-kilometer pipeline designed to bring natural gas across northeastern BC to a planned LNG Canada facility in Kitimat. The proposed sale is included in TransCanada's response to an NAB challenge filed by a BC resident who argues the project must be regulated by the federal government. TransCanada argues the Coastal Link gas pipeline is designed to move natural gas entirely within British Columbia, and therefore already existing provincial approvals are appropriate. After the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, hundreds of thousands of U.S. federal employees are back to work, including those in the Agriculture Department. Some agricultural services that were affected include crop reports detailing size of the 2018 harvests. The Agriculture Department also had to delay a deadline for aid to offset trade losses with China. Critics said the shutdown also meant growers who had questions about the process could not reach out to USDA employees. Dairy Farmers of Canada is getting federal money to put towards its quality assurance program and for environmental sustainability. Agriculture Minister Lawrence MacAulay announced $2.7 million for the milk organization. Dairy Farmers of Canada President Pierre Lampron says the funding will allow for improvement of their Pro-Action Quality Assurance program, which he says will ensure the industry meets expectations of consumers for many years to come. Apple has made their group chat function in FaceTime unavailable after users said there was a bug that could allow callers to activate another user's microphone remotely. The bug was demonstrated through videos online and report by tech blogs. Reports say the bug in the video chat app could allow an iPhone user calling another iPhone through group FaceTime to hear the audio from another handset, even if the receiver did not accept the call. Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, serial killer Bruce McArthur pleaded guilty today to 8 counts of first-degree murder. McArthur made headlines when 8 men in Toronto's gay village disappeared between 2010 and 2017. The U.S. Department of Justice has laid 13 charges against 4 Huawei executives. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Southern Albertans are invited to take part in this year's Polar Plunge and show winter Who's Boss, taking place on Saturday, February 2nd from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at Henderson Lake. People can register for the event, which is a fundraiser for Special Olympics Alberta. Registration cost is $75, for which participants can raise or donate themselves. Proceeds will go towards supporting Special Olympics athletes in Lethbridge and across the province. For more details and to register, visit alberta.polarplunge.ca. It's the 15th annual Woods Homes Children's Benefit Gala taking place Saturday, March 30th at 6 p.m. at the Coast Hotel Lethbridge. This special night's theme is Come Sparkle With Us and is presented by College Ford Lincoln in support of the emergency use shelter, The Core. This year's gala includes a delicious dinner, silent and live auctions, and live entertainment by the Chevelles. For tickets and sponsorship opportunities, contact Colleen by calling 403-317-1777 or visit woodshomes.ca. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help serve hot meals, assist with Foot Friday, and help sort incoming donations. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The U.S. Department of Justice has announced 13 criminal charges against Huawei executives and its affiliate Skycom Tech. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joins me now from Los Angeles. Lisa, among those charged is Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou, who is currently free on bail in Vancouver as the U.S. seeks her extradition.
Yes, so these are charges for wire fraud and bank fraud, and meant to set the tone for U.S., I should say, Western relations with China, but more specifically U.S. relations and more specifically economic relations and trade relations between the U.S. and China. Today there was a press conference from the White House in which the Department of Treasury announced that they will go hard and targeted towards China, and this will be the most comprehensive and the harshest penalties against China in order to set the record straight. I mean, if you remember, this is something that President Trump campaigned upon, evening the scale when it comes to global trade in the United States. And in particular, he called out the Chinese government and how they've been getting away with murder, so to speak, when it comes to global trade. There has been no rules, and they've been running amok and taking advantage, to use the words of Donald Trump, of the United States, and it's time to even that scale. So this is in part it's targeted, but it's more symbolic than anything else. And as you know very well, Canada has been dragged into the fray as well.
Yeah, first China arrested the two Canadians they deemed to be a threat to national security. And now the Chinese government has also detained a Chinese-born Australian writer the government deems a national security risk. The Australian Defence Minister says there's no relation between the arrest of the Canadians and this recent abduction.
And that may be the case. I think China right now is trying to really flex its muscles and say that no one can speak about the Chinese government and get away with it. So this Australian would speak about Chinese interference and involvement in Australia, and perhaps that is what warranted for the Chinese government his arrest. Now, of course, this is being looked at in a wholesale fashion together with the arrests of the Canadians, because of where we are right now with regards to China looking as though it's just haphazardly taking Western hostages in order to get its point across. And perhaps this could be bundled together to say that that is what the Chinese are trying to convey. Don't speak bad about us, don't try to bring us down, and don't try to limit us when it comes to global trade. We will not be punished, we will not be limited, we will not be restricted, we won't be told what to do, we won't be embarrassed. All the things that maybe foreign nations right now have had frustrations leading up to, but now have the opportunity to step up and say, no more China, you can't get away with this. So, add this to the list of, muscle flexing or opportunistic moves that the Chinese government has made in the past few months.
2 bombs went off in a Roman Catholic church in the Philippines during Sunday Mass, killing more than 20 people and injuring many others. Lisa, ISIS has claimed responsibility.
Yes, so there's a few different parts to this. For those who don't know, there are many insurgencies within the Philippines. It's not somewhere that we usually look to when we talk about Islamic terror groups infiltrating. And when you look at ISIS, outside of their caliphate in Syria, in Raqqa, Syria, or outside of Iraq, they're hardly spoken about. And if they are, it's either in Northern Africa, in the Sinai Peninsula, etc., or one-off attacks in Europe. But they have also been very much frequenting and putting off these one-off attacks in the Philippines. And the Philippine government has done all that it can to try to curb the influence of these groups. Now, the other issue that the Filipinos are dealing with is this this desire to separate from the Muslims who live in the southern part of the country. And just last week, this is the interesting part about the timing of this attack, very close to where this church attack was, there was a referendum, there was a vote to have autonomy for the region in which many Muslims live. And this is a triangle region where many Muslims come over the border from Indonesia or Malaysia, and the Philippines basically voted to allow to give them their autonomy. Now that is where the true message of ISIS comes through. What does ISIS want, and why would they bomb a church right after this vote came out in favor of the Muslims? Well, it just goes to show us that ISIS is not particularly looking for autonomy or land or this formality or to be recognized by any governments. They are looking to make themselves known in the way of these one-off attacks. And now, since there is this, the global headlines are saying that ISIS is being diminished, they want to make themselves known and say, no, we're not diminished, we're right here, and we're going to show you that we're right here. So that's where it makes perfect sense that they go after Christian groups, American groups, isolated Western, pockets within the east part of the globe. So this is no surprise. It's unfortunate. It's very sad. Christian communities obviously in mourning whenever there is a church attack like this. These are people who are praying and people of God. So it's not surprising, but of course an very upsetting headline.
Yeah, and ISIS has never played by the rules, A burst mining dam in Brazil triggered a devastating mudslide in Brazil, Lisa. 58 confirmed dead and hundreds are still missing, but the cause of the dam burst remains unclear.
Yeah, they don't know what it's from, but they are looking at the company Vale, mining company, as not being careful, not having the right precautions in place, and still there is no definitive answer as to why this explosion took place. There are 300 people still missing, and as the hours go by, they're assuming that we will add, and we hope not, but add those numbers to the death toll. Crews are working around the clock. This has been devastating for Brazil, but from those who've been interviewed about this story, they say that this is nothing new, and it's something that both the government and the private industry should have been more careful about regulating what happens on these mine sites.
With the clock ticking down towards the March 29th British exit of the European Union and the UK Parliament in disarray, Queen Elizabeth has now sounded off, telling her parliamentarians to end the bickering.
Yes, there is a lot of back and forth here. The businesses are frustrated. Theresa May, of course, is very frustrated. The European Union is frustrated. So everyone is standing back and wondering what will happen when we come to that deadline. Because on the one hand, obviously, there was a vote for Brexit. On the other hand, Theresa May could not come up with a better or produce a better offer that would be accepted by parliaments and that would be favorable to both the European Union and the Parliament, within the UK. Now, what will happen if there is no deal, meaning that they have to go at it alone? Well, it's going to be very frustrating. It's going to be basically a rogue departure from the EU. It will mean a lot of uncertainty for their markets and for their businesses, and that's not the way that they particularly would want to go. But the businesses are calling and on the two sides, meaning the pro and the against, and Theresa May is calling for the same, to stop the bickering. And that it's a funny headline, but it's true. It seems as though this has become very petty. We can relate to that here in the United States as to petty politics, with two sides quarreling and missing the bigger picture here. And I think that's what the sides are saying here.
Canada, the United States, and many South American countries are now recognizing Venezuela's opposition leader, Juan Guaido, as the country's new interim president. The U.S. is actually taking it a step further and is ready to move forward with economic sanctions against Venezuela unless Nicolas Maduro resigns. Lisa, it's getting uglier.
It's getting uglier. He's not going to go down without a fight. Maduro has in his possession the top brass of the military. He has some private sector head honchos, if you will, like the oil industry, which I don't know if many people know this, but Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. And to think that the people in that country have to live in poverty with all that oil is just mind-boggling. He also has the support of rogue nations like China and Iran and Russia. And I call them rogue nations because they are taking a stand to support Maduro at the chagrin of all the other nations, 21 plus, including nations within Europe, the UK, the United States, Israel, who are standing in support of Maduro. Most importantly, Latin American neighboring countries are so happy to see the prospect of a Maduro-less Venezuela. This is a humanitarian crisis that has been going on for months and months and months. And the people who are coming out in protest, this is the happy day that they were waiting for. And again, Maduro believing or having this faux confidence in himself and the military will not go down without a fight. So the U.S. announced today that they will be sanctioning the oil industry, they will be sanctioning all businesses, and they will be sanctioning Maduro. So until he steps down, these economic pressures are meant to squeeze him to the point where he won't be able to survive, and then that money will be held and then given to the new government and released when the time comes. But it seems like this man, Guaido, is well positioned. He has a degree from George Washington University. He understands the lay of the land. He's young, charismatic, and perhaps carries with him the hope of the Venezuelan people going forward. So it might get worse before it gets better, but the Venezuelan people, for once, are filled with hope and with the hashtag January 23rd.
The United Nations Human Rights Office has named a 3-person team of international experts who are going to investigate the death of Saudi-born writer Jamal Khashoggi. Lisa, a little bit of international intrigue here.
Sure. I mean, they'll probably make a book and a movie out of this, and who knows what else. But it seems a little bit excessive. Did they kill him? Yes. Why do we need to know the details or to spend, global funding on this? Because of the pressure on the United States and others who have not supported Saudi Arabia, but perhaps given them a pass on this for for the macro foreign policy, the bigger picture. The United States obviously has a very lucrative arms deal with Saudi Arabia. We look to them as the Sunni kind of cure-all for the growing Shiite threat by Iran in the region, and they are an interest-aligned ally, not a true ally. So beyond a slap on the wrist, which I don't know, perhaps Secretary of State Pompeo and at the time Secretary Mattis and President Trump could have been a bit more stern, or a bit more serious about acknowledging or condemning the murder, then we wouldn't be at this point. I've said this many times on many TV and radio programs. I think if President Obama were still in office, he would have done the same thing with regards to policy. With regards to rhetoric, however, he probably would have said, this is troubling and we will press the Saudi regime, but we look forward to better relations down the line, and we look forward to continuing our foreign policy with Saudi Arabia as a partner in the region, as usual. Meaning nothing would change. It's just the rhetoric that matters. And in this case, perhaps because the United States didn't fully call out the Saudis on the murder of Khashoggi, we have now a team of investigators who need to look into this. I don't know what more they're going to find when we have a tape and we have, all the facts that we pretty much need.
Lisa, a Christian criminal research expert has apparently been taken hostage by the Islamic State during an attack on Egyptian security forces in Sinai about a week ago. The man was involved in the government's campaign against ISIS. So terrorists are looking at torturing this man for information. What are you hearing?
Right. So, when you look at ISIS, I don't know if they want any information other than, a kind of tit for tat, or to use this guy as a hostage. They might even kill him, behead him, as we've seen in other cases. They might even release a video. In the case of ISIS, they are more concerned about presenting themselves as brutal than tactical. And if they have this man in custody, it's more symbolic for them than to actually be, to employ him strategically and to get information. And, what could they do with that information? Well, any strategy against ISIS could be tweaked and changed, with the information that he might have or give out. So, as we said before, I think ISIS's main concern is to say we're here and we're here to stay. So when you have generals or President now Sisi, who's been very, very tough on ISIS and on insurgencies in general, the message is being delivered loud and clear to him, particularly in the Sinai, where you have the Israelis and the Egyptians both going very hard, collaborating on, really ridding that region of its terror influences. I think that is where ISIS wants to make its mark and say, we're here to stay, and we're going to deliver that message loud and clear. So if they have someone, they'll use him perhaps to get some of their own prisoners out. They'll make some sort of swap, or they'll kill him again as a kind of a message to Sisi that they're still there and thriving.
Listen, with all the turmoil in his own country, French President Macron paid a visit recently to Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt. Now, do you think they talked ISIS? Was it defense, trade, or perhaps human rights issues?
You know, this is a very interesting story because, as you said, Macron has this yellow vest crisis going on in his country, and it's something that we didn't expect to see because he's young, charismatic. He promised the French people the world through liberalism, and it backfired. And now people are on the streets with a slew of complaints against him, including human rights, including the economy, including a call for democracy, which is interesting because he is extremely liberal. And now he's traveled to Egypt, and he says to Sisi that, I think you got a little overboard and you aren't really adhering to human rights here in this country, and we're going to call you out for it. So it seems a little bit interesting, but in the world of politics, it's he's either being completely dismissive of what's going on in his own country, or trying to take the attention off of that and putting the attention on a man in the Middle East. And I think Sisi's response to Macron was entirely appropriate. He said, here in Egypt, it's not like Europe. It's an entirely different animal. We have different rules, different constituencies, and we have to act differently. So I think it was a great answer. He's dealing with terrorists. He's dealing with the Middle East, and he's not dealing, or North Africa. He's not dealing with, extremely liberal, bohemian types who are on the streets like you have in France. So very interesting what's going on, this crossover between different world leaders, the Europeans, the Middle Eastern, Middle Easterners. So you can kind of tie this into the what we had earlier this week with the Poland conference, and the rest of Europe, not wanting to take the invitation because they don't want to speak badly about Iran. I mean, it goes down the line about how the Middle East is now viewed from a very different point of view when it comes to Europe.
Now, we only have a few short moments left here, Lisa. There were some tensions in Germany's loveless coalition government recently when the transport minister, Andreas Scheuer, who is from Bavaria, where they make the beautiful BMWs, asked for reassessment of limits on vehicle emissions. The auto industry makes up a huge part of Germany's economy.
Yes, huge part of Germany's economy, but what they believe is that they have huge strides to make with regards to the environment and the emissions from the cars. So what this man has put out is to, and Germany has agreed to, is that between 2021 and 2032, I believe, a span of about a decade, they want to reduce their emissions by half. It's quite ambitious, particularly given the nature of the German cars. I think people love them for many things, but low emissions is not one of them. So we'll see what happens. I think they want to rely on this for their economy. I think the Germans have kind of teetered back and forth with their economy in recent years, but they've held on to this industry. The car industry has been theirs. And I think that they would want to keep up with the changing demands across the globe. You have Tesla, you have green cars, you have a real demand for clean energy cars, and they want to make sure that they can keep up with that demand.
And if you ever get a chance, please visit Munich. It's an incredible area. I've got some family down there. It's just gorgeous. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles, California. Thanks, Lisa.
My pleasure.
We sometimes hear about food shortages in many parts of the world, but is it possible that we actually do have enough food, but the problem is rather that we tend to waste our food? Joining me now via Skype from Toronto to talk about this today is Laurie Nichols, CEO of Second Harvest. Welcome to BCN, Laurie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Now, first of all, can you explain to our viewers what Second Harvest is really all about?
Sure. So Second Harvest is Canada's largest food rescue organization. And that means that we're picking up surplus food from across the supply chain and making sure it gets to communities that need it. So that could be food banks or schools or anywhere that there's a need for community food. That's what we do.
Now, your organization conducted a study called The Avoidable Crisis of Food Waste, which found some astounding numbers. Almost 60% of food produced in Canada is either lost or wasted. Now, how do we actually lose food?
Oh, in many, many ways. So we had launched an online platform called foodrescue.ca last year, and that would allow communities to directly connect with agencies. So a food business and an agency or social service agency could access food there. And what we found was, oh dear, there is so much more food than we had anticipated. And so we, with the support of the Walmart Foundation, invested in a study. And there is almost 60% that is lost. You are correct, but it's right across the supply chain. And what was fascinating was we usually blame the consumer, but it wasn't at the consumer side. It was a little bit consumer and mostly production and manufacturing.
So, Lori, how are we actually wasting food? How is that happening?
Many different ways. So right at the farm, we grow too much. We have far too much food being produced in Canada. So we produce enough food for 52 million people in Canada. We only have 37 million people in Canada, and we have 4 million that are food insecure. So part one is we produce too much food. But then we lose a lot of food through forecasting. Best before dates are probably one of the biggest culprits, and that's right across the supply chain. That is not necessarily at the consumer, because we lose tractor trailer loads full of food because of an upcoming best before date, which really has nothing to do with food safety.
Now, the report says roughly 1/3 of the wasted food could be rescued and distributed to communities in need across the country. Can you expand on that a little?
Absolutely. So that's totally avoidable. That's avoidable and edible, good, healthy food. And what I'm talking about is not brute fruit that we're picking through. I'm talking about literally tractor trailer loads full of milk and farms fresh, apples fresh from the farm. And so why are we letting that go into landfill? Not only could we be eating it as low income people or just any people, but it has a significant impact on our environment, like terribly negative when it goes into landfill. So we're connecting people through foodrescue.ca.
So how do you actually go about measuring the amount of waste, and why is it happening?
So we measure the amount of waste by partnering with Value Chain Management International, and they are international industry experts and have done this type of research for many, many years. So as a charity, we went to the professionals and asked them to measure it. But we did it with an advisory group that included major retailers and farms, and also almost 1,000 industry experts. So we went and got primary data. This is a world first research project. This is not a literature review. This is primary data. And so that's who did our research in partnership with us.
Now, the report identified some root causes: consumers buying food at the store, especially on sale, and then just simply tossing away any surplus amounts.
Sure, but again, it's not really about the consumer. We often blame the consumer, and it's not. It's much further up the supply chain. So what are we doing in business? We've kind of come to accept waste as just a cost of doing business. And until we measure it, we don't really recognize the amount of money we're losing in business. So this is the step one. We now have a standardized measurement that any industry can use.
Let me ask you something. I mean, I've got yogurt at home. It's got a best before date, let's say maybe, I don't know, maybe a month and a half or 6 weeks from now. And is it okay to maybe have that yogurt a week later, maybe 2 weeks later? Is it still safe?
It sure is, because best before has nothing to do with food safety. So there are only 5 foods that actually expire. And those are meal replacements like Ensure, baby formula, protein replacements, and 2 are by prescription only. So nutrients that you get through a feeding tube, and 1 is diet related. Those are the only foods that expire. Everything else is at best before.
You know what? I have some eggnog at home too that expired, it said, in the middle of December. And I love eggnog. Should I give that a shot? Maybe give it a sniff when I get home? What do you think?
I think you use your common sense. And okay. Yes, absolutely. Give it a sniff. But also, if you go to our website, foodrescue.ca, there is an actual document that will tell you how long your food is good for, to donate and also to consume. And also, your freezer is your best friend. Throw everything in your freezer and it lasts so much longer.
Now, are there any legal concerns for businesses selling something that may be out of date?
Absolutely not. So selling, yes. Donating, no. So across Canada, we have in every province and territory either a Food Donation Act or a Good Samaritan Act, which allows businesses to donate food in good faith. On top of that, in the history of Canada or the US, nobody has ever actually sued. So I think we use this, there's a liability issue, as it's not accurate. And so we just need to educate people that there's really no liability. Donate as much food as you want.
Okay, let's talk about labor shortages. How can this really impact food waste?
Well, that is on the farm. So, I mean, there are a number of places, but when you have labor shortages, then you're not actually managing the crops. So your crop will just land on the fields and turn into compost, basically, or they'll toil it back into the field. So some of this is just gleaning and getting people to capture that food and collect it themselves, because we don't also want to give the farmer an additional cost. So how do we make sure we can get that food to the people?
Now, apparently low prices can create an environment in which it is no longer worth it for farmers to harvest?
Absolutely. Yes. So, and that's again about labor shortages, and perhaps they've grown an amount of food that they had forecasted for, but then in the end didn't sell.
Now, a similar problem is if food orders end up being canceled, then thousands of acres of produce end up being plowed under. Is there some way to set up a communication system that would see this food getting into the tummies of hungry people?
Absolutely. And again, I would refer you back to foodrescue.ca. So we're working with farms across Canada to ensure that we can get that food to the communities that need it.
Now, apparently fishermen have quotas as well, and a lot of fish end up being tossed back into the water to die if they don't match a quota?
That's true. And that's true across the supply chain, though, as well. So I'll leave fish for a second. But again, when we go back to aesthetics, so everybody thinks about this ugly produce. It's not about ugly produce in the traditional sense. It's really just about the grading system. So all your bananas have to be the same and look the same. That's an industry standard, but that means we're losing a lot of bananas. And that's true for apples and a lot of other foods. So we need to figure out really what are the specifications that are required. And it shouldn't really be about color or a simple size difference that's nominal.
Now, Lori, let me ask you something. Is there a stigma of some kind when it comes to people accepting food donations that comes from surplus sources? Do we need to maybe relabel it using better terminology?
We absolutely do. So there is a stigma, and I think we have to stop calling it food waste, because it's not. It's perfectly edible. It's surplus. It's excess food. And so it's language. Stop saying waste and start saying surplus. It's also about inclusion. We need to demystify this. So we need to have universal programs. This food is not just for people that are low income. This food should be eaten by everyone, including yourself, me. There's just so much of this food. Why are we not eating it?
Let's talk about specific changes you'd like to see made by the government and perhaps even by the food industry.
Sure. There's a number, and we're going to start small. There's about 100 recommendations, so I won't go through them all. But the truth is, if we don't measure it, we can't manage it. And so now we have a standardized methodology for measurement. All industry must measure. And I would like government regulation that's maybe regulation or encouragement or a voluntary measurement, because as soon as it's measured, it's managed. And we need leadership. So we know that in industry, there are some great leaders like the Walmart Canada and Walmart Global. They have zero waste as a mandate, as do Loblaws, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. So we need to follow that kind of leadership and work with them on successful, sustainable strategies.
Okay, you mentioned some of the big retailers. What are some of the ones that maybe don't have the best reputation when it comes to food waste?
I don't know. I'm going to be very honest.
You're not committing to us, Laura? Okay, that's fine.
No, but the reality is every major retailer and industry supports Second Harvest. Like, we've never had anyone say no to us. So part of it is just simply education about the liability, that there is somewhere for it to go. So I don't think anybody, as Canadians, we're very nice people. We want to do the right thing. We just need to have the system in place to do it.
Now, an interesting side note here is that food waste apparently has an environmental impact, as in landfills that create methane gas, which is 25 times more damaging to the environment than carbon dioxide.
It sure is. And that should scare us all. So Second Harvest, we are an environmental organization and a hunger support organization. We really do have a dual mission. And the environmental impact is so significant. It would be, if we could stop this from happening, it would be like taking all the cars off the road in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta for a whole year. So that's the kind of impact this food going into landfill has.
You know, if people want more information about Second Harvest, where should they go?
They should go to secondharvest.ca or foodrescue.ca.
Lori Nichols, CEO of Second Harvest, thanks a lot for joining me via Skype today from Toronto.
Thank you so much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, eat well, and have a great night.